Good day, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. A special welcome to participants from around the world, from Africa, and from our dear South Africa as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome. And as you all know, every year during the third week of November, individual pioneers, academics, practitioners, and civil society organizations working in the field of restorative justice across the world organize a series of events and campaigns to raise awareness about restorative justice. So after our first webinar during the 2021 International Restorative Justice Week, it is really my great pleasure to welcome you for this afternoon's webinar. It's an opportunity that we have to reflect on the progress made in the restorative practice field in the last year, to look forward to what's coming up in the future, to explore new and innovative applications of restorative approaches to justice, and ultimately to celebrate the opportunities of doing justice differently. So all participants, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A box. This event also, please note that it is being live streamed on YouTube, and please kindly use the chat feature that is reserved for comments and any additional notes. I would now have it is really my great pleasure to invite Professor Ernest Kgalema, the Dean and Head of the School of Built Environment and Development Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, to welcome you all formally. Thank you, Prof. Kgalema.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hagoben, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, colleagues around the world. Honored colleagues, distinguished guests, members of the legal fraternity and the judiciary, Honorable Judge Brian Mashile, who is the judge of the High Court of the Republic, community partners, students, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I acknowledge your presence and gives me a great pleasure to welcome you on this special day where reflection, sharing, learning will occur. This sharing circle of knowledge holders gives us an opportunity to reflect on the work you have embarked on for a while now. And it is an absolute honor for me to have and to welcome you at UKZN. Indeed, this is a special occasion, a time of reflection, a time of contemplating new openings for future engagements and all the possibilities of what bridging theory and practice mean. As you know, for us at the university, providing opportunities for learning is core to what we do, and part of our mandate is to offer safe places and spaces where comfortable, and as someone reminded me, uncomfortable conversations might occur. We hope that the conversation will integrate meaningful and ethical community engagement, and also to enrich the experience of our students, of the communities that we serve, and ourselves, with greater emphasis on reciprocal learning and reflection. Thank you so much for embracing us with your presence. And on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Nana Poku, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, and the executive within the College of Humanities, as well as the School of Built Environment and Development Studies, I welcome you. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted there. Ladies and gentlemen and participants, it's really my great pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, who hails all the way from British Columbia. Dr. Gustafsson is Executive Director of Fraser Region Community Justice Initiatives in Langley, British Columbia. He is an ordained pastor, adjunct professor in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser University, a registered clinical counselor, and a Knight of Honor in the 900-year-old Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Knights Hospitalier. He holds a PhD in criminological sciences from the Faculty of Law at KU Leuven, Belgium. He has vast experience in trauma recovery and healing, creating social structures that contribute to the making of just peace, assisting others who languish, trauma survivors in the main, to discover their own gifts, to recover hope, to grow and to flourish. He's a sought-after speaker and trainer, often found working with nonprofit and Indigenous organizations throughout Canada and internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, the wisdom is in the story, making victim-offender dialogue accessible to all, lessons from the Canadian experience. It is really my great pleasure to welcome Dave, who has been deeply influenced by Canadian Indigenous elders and storytellers who teach and very effectively through the use of stories, some of these handed down through many generations. Using story from personal to the public and political spheres, Dave will trace the history of developments by his small nonprofit organization in Langley, British Columbia. I have great pleasure in welcoming Dave to this webinar and look forward to his presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Hargovan. It's indeed a great pleasure to be part of this and to be invited to kick off the panel. I'm going to start in a rather colloquial way. And I just have this sense that all over the world, the words "once upon a time" are magic words, and that there's stories that bind us together in our common humanity that maybe speak more loudly than lots and lots of statistics and stacking up the quantitative research. At any rate, I'm going to begin with a couple of stories. I'd like to greet you, first of all, and welcome you from beautiful British Columbia, where it is now 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:11, and -6 centigrade. So it's rather different than it is there in South Africa at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The first story I'm going to share is one involving my 7-year-old son. He's 42 now, but he was 7 when this occurred. And my family was way up in Glacier National Mountain Park in the United States, in Colorado, very, very beautiful place, where it was the story that there was tremendous trout fishing at the very top of the mountain in a glacial lake, a volcanic lake. So just before the day that we were to hike up to the mountain and try our hand at fishing in this lake, we were there to marry some very, very good friends of mine. The children were all playing together, and I collected my son and said, "Son, let's go down to the general store. There's some buildings down there, log buildings, with a marvelous kind of construction that has a particular kind of joint at the corners that I want to go have a look at. They're really lovely buildings." So Aaron hopped in the back of the car with me, and we drove down, went to the general store, picked up a couple of items, got into the car, and drove away down to see one other building, the major park building. And as we got out of the car, Aaron said, "Daddy, I have something stuck in the lining of my pocket." And so I pulled out the lining of his pocket and looked, and there, stuck in the lining of his pocket, was a little treble hook fishing lure. It happened to be exactly the fishing lure that I'd heard his little cousin tell him would be the most productive lure to be using in that trout pond at the top of the lake. So I said to him, "Aaron, where did you get this?" And Aaron said, I could see he was in the valley of decision, and he said, "Jeremy gave it to me." And I looked at him once more, and my voice got a little lower, and I said, "Aaron, where did you get this?" And he burst into tears, and he said, "Oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I lied." And I thought, he's at least got the major the major wrongdoing he's just confessed. So I took him in my arms and I said, well, Aaron, you know what we have to do, don't you? And Aaron knew that we were just beginning a victim offender reconciliation program, bringing minor miscreants diverted from the courts into our home, into our basement, to meet with their victims, to hammer out restitution agreements and take responsibility for the wrongdoing. So Aaron had seen these people coming and going. He had some idea what this was all about. And he said, oh no, Daddy, do we have to do a VORP, Victim Offender Reconciliation Program meeting? And I said, yes, Aaron, I think that's the best plan. He said, oh no, Daddy, can't you just spank me? And I said, well, Aaron, I don't know that spanking you is going to teach you what you need to know here. Let's go back and see the store manager and see what can be done. Once more, he burst into tears. No, Daddy, no, there's a sign. And I said, what does the sign say, Aaron? And he said, shoplifters will be persecuted. Well, for a 7-year-old, I suppose that's how the sign read and how it looked. We went back to the store. I asked the woman at the till if there was a manager there, and she said, yes, indeed. So she got on her intercom system and called the manager. The manager came down this set of stairs in full view from a mezzanine, looking like the sword of Damocles about to descend on this little boy's blonde head. She walked up to us. I introduced my son, said, this is my son, Aaron, and he has something he needs to share with you. I don't know if this woman was a childhood educator or what, but she got down on one knee. She looked at him and she said, yes, Aaron? And he held up this now useless fish hook and he said, I stole this fish hook from your store and I've come back to apologize and ask you if you'll let me pay for it and maybe forgive me. She just fixed his gaze and she said, well, Aaron, I run this store and you probably know that when people steal things from here, the only way I can make that cost up is by adding to the cost of everything in the store. So your fish hook is going to cost 25 cents more and a candy bar will cost 5 cents more. Do you understand? I have to make up about $5,000 a year in this very small store by adding to the prices. He said, yes, I understand. And she said, but Aaron, I have a question for you. In all these years, do you have any idea how many people have come back to confess they stole something from my store, asked me to forgive them and to pay for it? Aaron said, no. She said, well, Aaron, you're the first. Your daddy must be very proud of you. She didn't know the half of it. Aaron's daddy was very proud of him indeed. Now, the point is that little boy knew the law. He knew better than to be stealing anything or putting his hand to things that didn't belong to him. But what the law had failed to do, grace and mercy have done. I don't believe that child has ever put his hand to anything that did not belong to him since. He's now the proud father of identical twin boys, married, has his own business, and is a fine, fine joy to his father to this day. Well, that's Aaron's story, but there are these stories that speak to the human condition and bind us together as one human family. In Canada, of course, our Indigenous people from time immemorial have passed stories down from generation to generation. Their teachings embedded in them, calling each member of their communities and their nations to what I call an upward nobility. There's this whole notion of upward mobility, but maybe there is also an upward nobility to responsibility for self and for others, according to the cardinal grandfather teachings. Now, these are also known as kindness teachings in other places, but I'll share them with you very, very quickly. These are the ones shared by Chief Robert Joseph. There's a cluster of about 10 of these, but most nations have 7 of them as their cardinal number. 7 is an important number in Indigenous teachings. So these are the ones that Chief Robert Joseph has shared with me. First of all, love, the essence of life. Truth, the need to speak honestly and openly with respect and to speak from the heart. Humility, respect, wisdom, honesty, the prohibition against lying or gossip, and the enjoining of keeping commitments. Courage would be number 7. And then Chief Joseph says about these teachings call us to our highest consciousness. He's aware that they're not lived out perfectly, not there as in any society, but those are the virtues to which everyone is asked to aspire and to which everyone ascribes. This is another of our Indigenous leaders who is also a marvelous storyteller. He's no longer with us, he's passed on, but he's left a tremendous legacy. You may have heard of Chief Dan George. This is him. He says, it's hard for me to understand a culture that not only hates and fights his brothers, but even attacks nature and abuses her. Man must love all creation, or he will love none of it. Love is something you and I must have. We must have it because our spirit feeds upon it. Without love, our self-esteem weakens. Without it, our courage fails. Without love, we can no longer look out confidently at the world. Instead, we turn inwardly and begin to feed upon our own personalities, and little by little, we destroy ourselves. Words of Chief Dan George that are well known and often produced. These next few pictures are from a place called Nuayanch at the head of the absolutely phenomenally beautiful and very, very wild Nass River in British Columbia, one of our 3 great salmon rivers. The UKZN in that particular area of the country are the first people to actually have made a land claim and signed a treaty with the province and with the nation, making it clear that the lands they live on actually belong to them. This has been a hard one for our Indigenous people, but the leadership in this particular community is phenomenal. It's matrilinear. This woman happens to be one of the people who helped forge that treaty. This one, I think this is a phenomenal picture. There's something going on here. There's ceremony going on here. Now, as the fall comes on, and you can see that it's already snowing, it would have been, at least in the history of these people, imperative that the salmon catch was fulsome and that it would be feeding them through the winter, but also the hunt for the big game, the kinds of things that the wolves would take down. So in this ceremony, this man is taking part in a ceremony about the hunt to come that will feed the nation, feed the people for the rest of the winter. There's a story about the origins of my own calling, and I need to be very quick about this, but my own vocation came about while I was traveling with a rock group in the United States. This may sound like it's very far afield from restorative justice, but we'll get to the point. One of the members of our rock group, a fellow named Garrison Nutt, had been incarcerated for a crime he had not committed. He was wrongfully convicted and put in Walla Walla prison in Washington, one of the most brutal prisons in the country. Apparently one night, the district attorney was tossing and turning in bed, and his wife said, "Ken, what's up with you tonight? Why don't you sleep?" And he said, "Well, sweetie, I'm troubled in conscience. I'm concerned that I might have wrongfully convicted an 18-year-old boy who's in Walla Walla tonight." And the story goes, I haven't talked to the prosecutor, but the district attorney, but Garrison apparently did. And the story goes that Ken then said, "Well, sweetie," the wife said, "if you have an 18-year-old boy in Walla Walla, Washington tonight, a peach-faced boy, Ken, what are you doing in this bed?" So he apparently asked permission to leave to stay till the morning, but he got on it. Garrison was exonerated and released from prison, and he came to work as the drummer in our band. He's a well-known session musician. If you know the marvelous song, Merrily Rushes, Just Call Me Angel of the Morning, well, Garrison is the drummer on that and many, many other fine tracks. He came to work with us, and every time there was a prison or a juvenile detention center anywhere along our tour route, Garrison would insist that we stop and spend some time playing for the prisoners and speaking to them, just getting to meet them, just on a person-to-person, face-to-face basis. The wardens in those days, things were a little different. It seemed that there was a whole lot of latitude to allow us to do that. In one place in Red Deer, Montana, we actually stayed locked up with the trustees for 7 days and met with the men day after day. There was another event that happened not long after that, when a dear, dear friend of mine was violently raped and left for dead in a clinic where she was working. She was a practicum student. She'd been there working on a paper, and a returned Vietnam vet had found her there, raped her, and literally left her for dead. In the hospital, I went to visit her. I was almost embarrassed to be male walking into that hospital room and sitting down in the chair beside her. She was dozing, and I just waited for her to wake. And when she did, she was surprised to see me there and obviously pleased to see me there. And she began right off. She thanked me for coming, and then she said, I can tell that you're anxious and uncomfortable. Couple things I want to say, first of all, just to kind of set some parameters in place. Don't try to be my superhero. Don't go looking for this guy. He could probably kill you with his bare hands. Don't try and be a Superman or superhero. Second, don't try to be my psychologist. I'm surrounded by absolutely wonderful help. And third, David, don't try to be my savior. Savior has been done, and it's way above your pay grade. And after all of that, it was almost as though she'd rehearsed it, knowing I was coming. And I said, so what do you need from me? And she said, I need from you what you've always given me. I need you to simply be there. Just be there, David. And it taught me something very, very important. I use a term about the paraclete very, very frequently. Paraclete is a Greek cognate word, para, alongside, as in a parable, which is a story alongside a truth to illustrate that truth. And kaleo, which is pronounced, as I just said it, kaleo, it means literally called or to be called. The first, I'm a bit of a word nut, so I had to go back to the first uses of this word. And sure enough, I found them in a Greek dictionary. And apparently it was first used by a Roman historian named Herodotus. And it was used to indicate someone who would go to Caesar's court for you as an advocate, as a lawyer, as someone who was called alongside you to assist, advocate for you. So the paraclete actually means someone called alongside another to support, assist, and advocate for them, to shoulder another's burdens, to bear witness, and to intercede for them. This has an awful lot, I think, to do with restorative justice. What it means for us to be dually partial for both the victims and the offenders, the wrongdoers and the people who are harmed, to be equally partial to both of them, committed to their healing and their well-being, to walk alongside them until such time as the process is done and the healing is transpired. Howard Zehr says retribution, Howard Zehr, who is known, at least on this continent, as the grandfather of restorative justice, retribution is a dominant framework in modern criminal law theory. So according to Howard, the retributive system is founded on the following assumptions. Crime is essentially law breaking. When a law is broken, justice involves establishing guilt so that just deserts can be meted out by inflicting pain through a conflict in which rules and intentions are placed above outcomes. They simply have greater import. Excuse me. However, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn eloquently said, if only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Richard Rohr, who wrote a marvelous book called The Naked Now, includes this thought. The personal histories of most prisoners, if not the majority, include incidents of severe victimization, abuse, neglect, and significant adverse childhood experience. While no amount of victimization can excuse or be seen as license for the victimization of others, nor can it simply be ignored. Pain that is not transformed is transmitted. It will be transmitted. It's a matter of time and place. So restorative justice, Howard, once again, is an adaptation of his definition, is a process which involves, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific event or a succession of events which caused harm. Together, those impacted identify and address the harms, the needs, and any resulting obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. Now, there are many definitions, and I'm sure you would have them in your own context. But if you have a context anything like ours, you'll find that politically, the pendulum swings back and forth, on and on through the decades, from retribution and punishment to restoration and rehabilitation, and back once again. I do a lot of sailing. Here's one more story. I love to sail, and I very frequently, when in my Monday through Thursday job in the prison system, working with victim offender reconciliation and mediation, restorative opportunities for the victims of very, very serious criminal matters, violent criminal matters, and the perpetrators who cause them harm, I frequently have to just, when I'm up to here with murder and mayhem, just have to go out on the boat for a couple of hours. I'm not a rich man, but I have a small sailboat that is a great joy to me. After a couple of hours out there, I feel like I'm ready to go back to the task. So a narrow lens or a telephoto lens, for example, on this occasion would show a little fishing boat. I don't know if you can see it. It's a little black shape in the middle of the picture. And it's a small fishing boat or fishing vessel off my bow, easily avoided, no threat to me, my sailboat, or my crew. But a wider lens indicates something very different. A wider lens admits more light, more information, more relevant data, and there's a freighter booming down the shipping lane at plus 20 kilometers per hour. If I collide with her, sorry, that's nautical miles per hour. It's a whole lot faster. Collide with her, and there'd be absolutely nothing left to restore. The point being that we need to widen the lens and get beyond this notion of the questions simply asked by retributive justice to the wider questions asked by restorative justice. Retributive justice asks just these questions, these three primary questions. What rules, what laws have been broken, who did it, what do they deserve by way of punishment, to try and balance these arcane and mythical scales of justice. Restorative justice widens the lens, admits more light, more data, and asks different questions, a totally different set. Who's been hurt? What are their needs? Whose obligations are these? And what process do we need in order to collectively put things right to the greatest possible degree? The first time I saw this plane, and here's another one of Uncle David's stories, it was in my grandfather's hand. It's an incredible plow plane, a router plane that cuts 2 or 3 routes at the same time. He put it in my hand, and I held it and saw all these knurled knobs and the patina from his hand on the wood, and I just thought, what a marvelous thing this is. I had been working with my dad and my grandfather for the previous few days. We were building our first family home, 3 generations of Gustafson men. At 7 or 8, my job was to pound 3 nails into every floorboard laid diagonally across the joists in the home that would form the first floor of our home. My grandfather said to me, Davy, we don't pound nails with that. I remember being a little bit miffed, thinking, I know better than that. He's been watching me pound with a hammer all morning. And then I should have known this is my beloved grandfather. There was going to be a gentle teaching in it. He said, we always use the right tool for the task. Otherwise, you run the risk of harming yourself or harming someone else or doing irreparable damage to the material you're working on. And then once again, the chuckle in the soft Swedish accents in which he said, if you do irreparable damage to the material you're working on, frame it, sign it, hang it on the wall, and call it art. So that is one of my earliest childhood teachings, and it's something that's governed our practice here in the little nonprofit where I work for a long, long time. We've been working to build tools, to build models, and to use the right tool for the task at every stage along the criminal justice continuum, the continuum of conflict and crime of all sorts. But Mr. Fuller once said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. I could see that the criminal justice system, start to finish, was badly flawed in our country, and flawed because it was built on some false premises. All the way back to Aaron's story. I wonder what would have happened if I had harshly punished my son. Would I have made him a better human being? Would I have corrected his behaviors? Somehow we have built this entire criminal justice and correction system on the notion that punishment works. And maybe that ought to be the first question in every one of our stories. The question, does it? Ideas. Oscar Wilde once said, an idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. Einstein went on to say, if at first the idea is not absurd, then there's no hope for it. And Edison said, nearly everyone who develops an idea works it up to the point where it looks impossible, then they get discouraged. That's not the place to become discouraged. We know that Thomas Alva Edison he's credited with being the inventor of the electric light bulb. Apparently, he tried 6,000 different filaments before he found the one that worked. And he said, when someone said, didn't it discourage you to have all those failures? He said, not one of them was a failure. Every one took me in the direction of success. So we set out to build a model, to build the right tool for the task in dealing with the most serious and violent crime in the criminal code in Canada. The violent offenses against the person was the context. I managed to get the names and permission to interview all of the men, and they were all men in this case. We didn't interview any of the women, although we certainly have worked with women since. I was given permission to interview all of the men placed in our local penitentiaries, federal penitentiaries here in Canada. So people who'd committed serious enough harms that they were going to be doing a minimum of 2 years in prison, anywhere on up to life 25 or more, perhaps even indeterminate sentences. I asked, would you meet with the other? So I asked the prisoners, would you meet with your victims and the survivors of your criminal offenses in a case like yours, if we could promise that it would be facilitated by a competent, highly trained person? 87% of the offenders said yes when we interviewed the victims, matched by offense to these same perpetrators. The victims in 82% of the cases said, yes, I would meet with that individual if you could guarantee me some degree of safety, and this will take place in the prison, or some secure place in the community if they're on parole. 87% of the offenders, 82% of the victims. I thought, I don't need a whole lot higher percentage than that. Let's get started. I wrote a proposal for the Correctional Service of Canada. It was accepted. The commissioner, when he met with me, said, let's give you 2 years. I'm interested in how this will go. He was a very enlightened commissioner, an Icelander. His name is Ollie Ingstrup, and he definitely was a precedent setter. So we've been building the right tool for the task all along this continuum. The program I'm talking about right now is the one at the little green bean at the top of the spectrum, where we're dealing post-incarceration, after the sentence and after the incarceration, with mediating the conflict between the perpetrator and the survivor of their criminal harms. It's gone extremely well. We've done well over 1,000 cases. I think we're up to about 1,500 now. The therapeutic benefits for the victims have been remarkable, and our recidivism rates have been remarkable as well. You would think that correctional systems all over the world would be beating a path to this particular better mousetrap. In the United States, according to the Pew Foundation and the Department of Justice there, if you're incarcerated for a crime and you're released finally when your sentence is over, 68% of those individuals end up back in, charged and convicted of new offenses. In Canada, we do a little better, 37.1, according to Frank Porporino, who's one of our research gurus. The people who've been through our program, according to CSC's, the Correctional Service of Canada's own research, recidivated about 8%. A quarter of what's happening even in our own nation. So we built tools for the task all the way back down to conflict in the school system. We have a partnership with the Langley schools, 46 of them, thousands and thousands of students. And for 20 years, we've been building programs there where 3 of our full-time staff work in the schools, conducting dialogue circles, doing mediation, teaching mediation, peer mediation skills to the students themselves. I would suggest that by the time you finish grade 12 and you matriculate from these high schools, you would be sufficiently competent that you could tackle almost anything. The training goes on and these students take it in stride. By the time they're finished, they're very, very proud of their skills and abilities, and they're making a huge difference in their schools. As a matter of fact, I once had a principal tell me, I don't know what's going on, Dave, but virtue is stalking my halls. They claim that we have, over these 20 years, contributed to the changing of a culture of the schools from a punitive one to a restorative one. That job isn't done. It will never be done because there's constant turnover in the schools of students, of learners and teachers. But these programs are creating connection, learner to learner, student to teacher, teachers to administrators, and all of those to their parents. We're literally creating cultures of respect and responsibility, with the parties to these processes experiencing engagement, connection, and cohesion, resolution of their conflicts, even the most traumatic ones, issuing in a new climate of safety, of belonging, and yes, I'm prepared to say it, of healing and transformation. So I'm aware that my time is coming to an end. We've had to deal with some risks and challenges, stubbornly tenacious beliefs that the public wants their governments to be tough on crime. At least the politicians seem to believe that. The belief that politicians who support restorative justice developments will appear soft on crime and therefore be punished at the polls, all of which results in further entrenched political resistance. Police and prosecutors will resist the implementation of RJ approaches as soft on crime, and that in fact does happen. And the concern that victims and victim-serving organizations will likely do the same, and that has in fact happened as well. There are other risks in tenaciously held beliefs, mythical beliefs, because every one of these is proven to be wrong. That victims could never be persuaded to meet with their offenders. I just told you what the statistics were in the research we did here. Meeting their offenders will simply re-traumatize victims. On the contrary, it has created tremendous healing and transformation and change for both parties. Offenders would never be motivated to meet voluntarily with their victims. It's astonishing that the greatest number of referrals that come to our programs come from the institutions where offenders have asked their institution parole officer to refer them to the program. And finally, that offenders would never fill their obligations to make meaningful amends, and yet they do. It seems that when offenders make commitments to the victims, they keep them to a degree that no one would ever believe unless you actually watch these stories play out. Decade after decade. We've been at it for 32 years now, and the results have been really quite phenomenal. Over the history of developments in Canada, we wrestled with every one of those challenges, and they keep coming around. We've met with a good deal of success, but each of those challenges still surfaces with regularity. It reminds me of the child at the fair playing whack-a-mole, trying to whack them down one more time, and it seems like that's just part of the task. It stretches us. Sometimes we feel like, we're between a rock and a hard place. All of this calls for tenacity, to keep on keeping on, believing, as Margaret Mead, the famous American educator, once said, never doubt that a small band of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. That was most insightful, and a lot of lessons that South Africa can draw from and share, with restorative justice in this country being embryonic, but quite developmental at the same time. Very interesting insights as to how the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program, the seeds were actually sown, and and then was allowed to actually grow in your country. The importance of indigenous voices as well, very interesting, and how restorative justice is now being implemented in the correctional centers. Especially of interest to many South African scholars and practitioners is the relevance of restorative justice and the applicability of restorative justice in cases of extreme violence and sexual offending behavior. So, the importance of actually supporting victims and standing by their side is so very important. We will discuss more later when we do the summation. For now, I want to call upon Mr. Mike Batley, who is going to speak to us on developments in restorative justice in South Africa, where to from here. For all of you who have actually been in the field of restorative justice in South Africa, restorative justice and Mike Batley, the two go together. Mike is a co-founder and director of the Restorative Justice Center, a vibrant multicultural civil society organization. It's within this context that he played a pioneering role in actually bringing restorative justice into the criminal justice system and into the public discourse, and developing associated services in South Africa. He was part of the group of experts that reviewed the UN Basic Guidelines for Restorative Justice in 2007. So I'd like to call upon Mike now, who will discuss how restorative values and approaches may be applied in a range of contexts in South Africa, and also explore the potential for restorative justice in addressing conflict, crime, and victimization in South Africa. Thank you, Mike, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hema, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Hema's indicated, I'm going to do a little bit of a stock take. It's going to be very brief. But I thought that in doing that, I would like to draw on the voice of another practitioner who was not part of our event last year, but I thought it would be good to hear his voice, Reverend Jonathan Clayson, who works with Hope Now Prison Ministry in the Western Cape. He wasn't able to be with us this afternoon, so I recorded a conversation with him, which I'm now going to play, and I wasn't able to edit the video, so please excuse the manual management of that. I hope it works okay. So let me see if I can get that to work right now. Been doing?
Yeah, as you said, I'm Jonathan Clayton, and myself and my wife were called into prison ministry, started in 1991 with the bigger picture of the prison chaplaincy, until we got to know more about the restorative justice process in 1998 and how that process developed into correctional facilities. And looking back now over the last 22 years, we are now international restorative justice and victim offender dialogue facilitators, working in different countries and also speaking on different platforms of restorative justice organizations across the globe. And I'm also now serving on the Restorative Justice International Global Board, and they recently appointed me as an ambassador for Restorative Justice International. And we are passionate about this process.
And perhaps, thank you. So perhaps you could just say a couple of words about your work, I think mainly in the Western Cape, but I know it's not limited to that, but just say a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah, basically, the time that we have is restorative justice process in custodial settings. Because there are many people that feel that why do you reach out to people that are already sentenced? And why don't you do this process as a diversion process and working with juveniles? And that we recognize that the restorative justice process, the restorative justice practices is very broad. We can bring restorative justice into any given situation, where it is in the home, in the community, in schools, in youth, in churches, in other organizations. It can be used everywhere, but because of our involvement with prison ministry, our main focus of restorative justice is in custodial settings, and we started at Paulsmoor in 1998 with a process, and it was growing through most of the correctional facilities in the Western Cape, but we also got a lot of invitations to other regions as well. In South Africa, I just finished a restorative justice process with 40 offenders at Leeuwkop Maximum Correctional Center, with 24 life sentence offenders on this process. That alone proved, not just to me, but also to the authorities, that the restorative justice process, even in custodial settings, is extremely important. And we can't ignore those who are even already sentenced.
Hands-on, a very broad experience. Could you give us just a few thoughts about how you see the status of restorative justice in South Africa at the moment? What are the things that give you hope, and what are the concerns you have?
Yeah, what really gives me hope in the restorative justice process is when people start to realize they're wrong. And now I'm making it more broad and not just referring to when people committed crime. When people violated people's human rights, where people disrespect other people, gender-based violence, conflict within workplaces, political challenges. If people, because one of the principles of restorative justice that crime/behavior damage relationships.
Yes.
And these damaged relationships need to be addressed in a therapeutic process. And part of that is the people that was involved and that was affected by the conflict or by the crime, they need to allow each other to express their feelings and their thoughts, but also the wrongdoer, the person that caused this conflict or crime, must consider to take full responsibility for their actions. That's very important.
Do you see that happening more in our country at the moment, or significant expressions of that?
Unfortunately, I see it more in the prisons than in the country itself.
All right.
I see that prisoners is taking more responsibility, because 65% of prisoners, they still claim to be innocent when they come into the system, although they were found guilty.
Right.
But when they go through this process and they realize the ripple effect of the crime, the damage caused by crime, and one of the other principles of restorative justice also is to focus on the harm caused by crime.
Mhm.
When the offenders listen to victims of crime, not related to their crime, we had major breakthroughs in terms of them coming forward, taking full responsibility, and then also come out with the truth. Because in many cases, and even the victims of crime or the victims that rights were violated, they only have half of the truth.
Yes.
The other half of the truth is not out yet.
Yeah.
And that's the area where victims want to hear the full truth so that they can start their process with closure. It's not just the immediate closure. They start with the process of closure if they get the full truth about the conflict or the behavior of the wrongdoer and taking responsibility, but also a sign of remorse, because this is what people want to know. In workplaces, in conflict situations, in crime, they want to know if the wrongdoer has remorse. And remorse is not tears. Remorse is a doing word. Remorse is action. You will engage in this conversation. You will allow the confrontation, and you will acknowledge the wrong. You will accept full responsibility, and you will do your best not to have that kind of behavior again.
I'm going to pause it there just for the sake of time. I think what was very significant in what Jonathan was saying there was how restorative justice creates a platform to help people who've caused harm to accept responsibility. Now, I think that's one of the key features of restorative justice. But if we think of our situation in South Africa, with so many examples and so many, such a strong sense of morality collapsing all around us, that's an incredibly important contribution that restorative justice can make to the moral fabric of society. He went on to say, in terms of the concern, that we don't do restorative justice or the participants, all the stakeholders involved, any favors if we shortcut or try and shortcut the process in any way. And he had some concerns that sometimes we try and do that, try and not do it properly, not do it superficially in some way, and then it doesn't have the desired effect. If we look at some other developments in our public discourse, and this is really not an exhaustive examination at all, just a few things that I think are significant that I've been aware of. A few months ago, there was an article in the Daily Maverick, an online daily newspaper, calling for a return to South Africa's utilization of restorative justice. So it referred back to the TRC, and even though there were concerns about that, it foregrounded the value that restorative justice had there, and saying we need to return to that in dealing with our current challenges. Then also by the Daily Maverick, a webinar that they hosted, interviewing Professor Thuli Madonsela and Friederike Bubenza, who's a developmental expert. She consults for the Center for, the name's eluding me now, one of the people who do the Africa Barometer in Cape Town, which was very well attended, so a lot of interest expressed there. And then shortly after that, there was a conference on restitution, obviously one of the central concepts of restorative justice, hosted by Professor Madonsela, taking a very deep academic, but then also a more practical look at what does that still mean, what should it mean for our South African context. I was reminded also of some of the things that our friend Dr. Carl Stauffer said at this event last year, and he was speaking very much about nurturing and building restorative justice as a movement. And some of the trends that he's seeing internationally were seeing restorative justice as moving across generations. And so he spoke of remembering without revenge, the role that restorative justice can play in trauma healing, and I think Dave has touched on that as well. The role of restorative justice in non-violent social change. I think that that's absolutely critical for where we are in South Africa at the moment. Restorative justice as community building, tapping into the concept of social cohesion. And of course, then drawing on Indigenous approaches in our own South African Indigenous approaches, but being ready to tap into the wider Indigenous experience and the wisdom that is in that, as Dave alluded to just now. So I think that all of those developments that sometimes come, it would seem out of nowhere, as a bit of surprise, but they really do form and shape, and I think we share them in as the steering committee in the Coalition for Restorative Justice, as part of our convictions as to why restorative justice is relevant to South Africa today. And so I've grouped it under these three headings and just really want to name them. So applying restorative justice values and approaches in a range of contexts. So it remains 100% relevant in criminal justice reform, offender reintegration, and victim empowerment. A further adaptation of that would be in the context of gender-based violence. There's increasing interest in the way we deal with environmental issues, and then community conflict and building cohesion, as I mentioned just now. In the coalition, we've started talking about the vision of a restorative city. So there's been some work done on that front internationally about framing what does a restorative city look like. And we think that that holds great promise for us to build a movement in South Africa to advance nonviolent transformation. Imagine if whole cities could begin to buy into the idea of a restorative city. And then some specific things that we think that we need to do at a political and an administrative level to re-establish partnerships with particularly the Department of Justice, but that would include the Department of Correctional Services, the Department of Social Development. I think those are the major players. There are obviously others as well. And we need to renegotiate the role that civil society organizations can play. And in that context, we need to go back to the guidelines for victim offender dialogue that the Department of Correctional Services put out earlier this year. And there's also a national policy framework that the Department of Justice put out several years ago that seems to have been forgotten, which we think could be very useful to be looked at again. So that's the sense of where we are at the moment. Lots of interest in restorative justice coming up sometimes unexpectedly, and indicating the relevance of restorative justice today, and that those are the focus areas in the coalition that we believe we need to focus on. Thanks very much, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. That was really, you set out the, where we are at and where we need to go quite succinctly. The reflections by Reverend Clayton were most informative as well. And I think, the potential for restorative justice, especially at the post-sentence phase, has not been fully explored. And there's great potential there for research as well. Yes, there's been a few developments, and the discussion around restorative justice is growing in various spaces. And I think we would, as you probably know, would have to start exploring how we could use restorative justice in the prevention of crime. I think, restorative justice has a great potential in custodial settings. because as we know, very rarely do victims get to tell their stories, nor offenders, and offenders have their own stories to tell, their own victimization, their own background, and restorative justice provides that opportunity for them to tell their stories and come to a position of truthfulness and honesty and openness in order for them to begin healing and not to then revert back into crime. Our next part of this webinar is actually quite an interesting one. It is a panel discussion, which will be shared by Leslie-Ann van Saun. She is the founder and managing director of Kulisa Social Solutions. Kulisa Social Solutions dates back to 1997, when Leslie-Ann was inspired by stories narrated by Credo Mutwa during the previous decades. And in collaboration with the Departments of Correctional Services, Education, Community Safety, and Social Development, the first ever offender rehabilitation program was introduced at Leeuwkop Prison just outside Johannesburg. Today, Kulisa operates throughout South Africa, and its mission is to address social vulnerabilities and inequalities by providing support and developmental know-how through key partnerships. Indeed, the partnership that the university is now establishing with Kulisa and other civil society organizations such as the RJC, Midway, Restore, you'll hear from Vanessa and Lisa later on, is key, not only for learning, for collaboration, sharing knowledge, but also to enhance practice and contribute to policy reform. Thank you very much, Leslie-Ann. I now hand over to you to actually chair the next part. The theme of the discussion will be restorative approaches in peacemaking and social cohesion in Alexandra, Johannesburg. And as we have just learned, that Kulisa has been working in Alexandra extensively since the social unrest in July 2021 in developing a socially cohesive Alex. So basically, we are very, very excited to hear about how restorative approaches can be used and applied in situations where there's community disjunction and community conflict, and how social cohesion can be reestablished. Thank you very much, Leslie-Ann. I hand over to you.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be on our second annual second annual Restorative Justice webinar. So hi to you all. I'm so very excited to be able to share with you Kulisa's approach towards systemic peacemaking, and especially the work that we've been doing in Alexandra for well over a year now. Kulisa has actually been operational in that township for 22 years and have developed a vast range of partnerships. Kulisa's approach towards community development is really taking an ecological approach. What we do is we look at the community and the environmental circumstances that influence the individual and trigger behavior that leads to bad outcomes as such. So what we've been doing in Alex in the past year has been looking at the causal factors of dysfunctionality, crime, and the extreme violence. And by doing so, we've been able to negotiate with different stakeholders and partners in finding out what their solutions to their problems are and navigating a way forward through multiple stakeholder engagement. And one of the key areas that we've been looking at is a social environmental justice, which has opened up a whole new world for us, looking at different triggers and different ways individuals interact with their communities, and how by looking at a total systemic approach, we can really start healing not only individuals, but institutions and the community as a whole. What has been very exciting has been our attention towards the UKZN River, which is a drastically polluted river that sees many, many deaths every year. It is a victim of gross neglect, contamination, and so many industries in the community actually triggering this very, very sad river that's been reduced to almost a meter wide. That used to be a river that was a blood running through this very impoverished township, which is now. And I have with me in a panel is 2 or 3 very special people. First of all, George, like Tom, who's been associated with KwaZulu for 15 years now. Together, we've pioneered so many amazing restorative justice programs. I think we touched the lives of at least 10,000 people from every single walk in life. George is an expert in restorative justice, from dealing with serious violent crime to community unrest to xenophobic attacks. And he's been pivotal in positioning KwaZulu as a leading player in this field. And then I have 2 of my colleagues from Alex who have been working with me since we started our peacemaking program. I'm calling him Junkie, Mr. Sello. He is the chairman of the Alexandra Water Forum. And I also have what we call the nickname Rasta, who is one of our real community leaders who daily walks towards the river and using his bare hands cleans the river with 21 other community members who are really trying to save the river. But sadly, his efforts are rendered so often so worthless, because all we find the next day is that the rubble and the junk is just chunked back into the river. So George has been doing some mediations with the view to our getting to the causal factors of why this is happening. And yesterday, when we had our first Imbizo looking at how we can salvage the UKZN River, we had an environmental attorney with us who was actually singing the same song as what we do. And she was saying, instead of attacking government and blaming the municipality and going to the Human Rights Commission, we've got to analyze the causal factors of why and who is actually contaminating the river from a broad scale. And we're very excited that this law firm is now partnering with us to run workshops with us on the different acts that will empower the community with the knowledge to understand the triggers that really are leading to this terrible demise of the river. So George is going to be sharing more with you. So I'm handing over to George. I'm just going to shift our screen.
Sit closer.
Yes, I think sit closer, and then come right in as well.
Can I begin?
Yeah.
Can I begin? Hello, everybody. I want to greet all. Hello, Emma. Okay, can I begin? I want to greet each and every one of you. Firstly, hello, Jonathan Clayton. We met some years ago when they sent me down to Goodwood Prison. At that time, I conducted training with you and the pastors down there. You're doing fine work in the prisons. Jonathan, hello to you. I want to greet Dave. Dave, in Canada, my drinking partner. Every year we go to our watering hole and we have our drinks. Dave, as everybody knows, is the pioneer of serious violent crime in the world. He's an inspiration, he's a buddy, he's a friend. Recently, Dave and I came to South Africa, where Dave did a whole bunch of interventions. And Dave is supposed to be coming back next year. Greet you, Dave. And Hema, hello, Hema. Some years ago, you wrote up KwaZulu's Justice and Restoration Program quite extensively, and we had a lot of interaction with you, Hema. I'm glad to see you still active. You're still at it.
Yes.
Les gave me your big manual to read. I haven't been able to read it. It's so extensive. He does very, very fine work, Hema. I want to greet Mike Batley. Mike Batley and I go back a long, long way, even before I joined KwaZulu. We worked together in Namibia. I conducted training for your team, Mike, teaching you in mediating or disputes in the workplace. And we've done so many other things, Mike. I want to thank you for sending the 2 articles concerning environmental restorative justice, which is what we are doing now. Thank you very much for that, Mike. I want to greet Vanessa. Vanessa, I think we have met in the past. I believe that you worked for NICRO at one time. I'm not sure about that, but NICRO and I have shared a platform many times, and NICRO was a forerunner of bringing restorative justice to South Africa. I want to greet Lisa. Lisa, we have not met, but in your biography, you mentioned the European Forum on Restorative Justice. I want to just say that I did attend one year the European Forum on Restorative Justice together with Martin Bright, and we shared a workshop with Nils Christie. As you know, Nils Christie's very famous article. I think I've greeted all of you. Hello. Today I have with me 2 colleagues. One is Jackie, and his organization is the Water Sanitation Community Forum. He deals with environmental matters. I gave a very quick half-an-hour workshop on conflict resolution to Jackie, and he in turn gave me a very extensive workshop about problems on the Jikskei River. And also have a very dear friend, a friend Rasta, who is a community leader who lives in the area. We went out there when we were doing our fact-finding mission to where he resides. In his area, he has a conflict. His side is having a conflict on the other side of the river. He'll go more deeply into that. My portfolio in this effort on the Jikskei River is to deal with all kinds of conflicts. As you know, colleagues, that we in the restorative justice, alternative dispute resolution field believe that conflict is a normal thing. It happens. It just does. And conflict can be a danger. It can also be an opportunity. That is the two characters in Chinese. Wei Ji means conflict can be very dangerous, leading to violence, broken relationships, but it also can represent an opportunity that is an opportunity to change, an opportunity to transform, an opportunity to move ahead. So this is our program on the Jikskei River, is to bring conflict resolution, peacemaking, peace building, and restorative justice all along the Jikskei River. We so far have looked at 3 different disputes, and my dear friend Janki will go into that a bit more. We went to three different areas, and we identified the issues over there, and we looked at the positions of the different parties and their interests, and we examined common ground. This is the building blocks that I believe will deal with the conflicts on the Jikskei River. These are only 3. There are many different matters going along the Jikskei River. Although the basic problem is to do with the environment, but we cannot move forward unless we deal with the conflicts arising from what is going on the river. From now, I'll hand over to my dear colleague, Janki Matala.
Yeah, thank you, George. Thank you very much. As we have said, is that as the forum, we are concerned in terms of the pollution in the river. And maybe to explain further is that Jikskei River is a long river that comes from all the way from Bruma to Northwest Province. So it's only a specific area where the river is being polluted in Alexander, from London Road to Marlborough Drive, where the Jikskei River is being polluted. So as the forum, we are very concerned regarding that. And also the people that is taking over from the river that wanted to own the river. So it's one of our critical points. as a forum to say we need to protect the river, we need to. And maybe to go a little bit back is that as a forum, we are reporting, or maybe the initiative of the forum came from the minister, Mr. Senzo Kunu, to say all because he's the minister of water and sanitation. So the minister give us the mandate to check or maybe to adopt the river. So as the Alexander Water and Sanitation, we have adopted adopt Joske River. The challenge is that it's a lot of dumping in the river. The reason why is that Alex, particularly the region E, doesn't have the landfill site. So there are people, or maybe there are individuals that also that have took advantage in terms of maybe took their trucks or maybe go and take the rubber from the suburb or whatever and dump them in the Joske River, which now the Joske River becomes so close and becomes so close and it becomes so close whereby as a forum we become so concerned. Yesterday Mbizo was one of the crucial things that maybe we needed to iron out and maybe comes with a solution, not blaming the government, but comes with the solution. And on the other side is the water treatment plant, whereby also the water treatment plant has been neglected for a long time. So as the forum, we have taken the initiative of taking the responsibility of making sure that we revamp the water treatment plant, we change it to the water museum, whereby our young generation will learn more in terms of the environmental issue, will learn more in terms of the water restriction, will learn so many things. And again, maybe to have a fishery area where kids they can also come and see school children, whatever, to come and maybe come and do their educational studies in terms of the museum. On the other side is a challenge again because of Joske River is redirect its own to household, whereby it has divert and lot of maybe close to 20 houses that are on the edge to fall into the Joske River. So those are my concern regarding the Joske River as the forum. Thank you.
Okay, as I said, we went into the area. At least I was. This is my mandate to deal with conflicts arising from what was happening on that area. And Janki was the person who at great length taught me the problems that are on the river. And in going to these areas, we met with one of the residents over there that he's actually resident in two areas. One is where he actually resides in another area called Station 8, that is the Laska village. And he will briefly go over what the conflicts over there are and what he feels our intervention is going to do.
Greetings. My name is Leti Tula, yes, from Alexandra. From last year, we started up cleaning the river, which was a challenge now, because what happened is we discovered that the more we clean the river, and the more people they are dumping into the river. So we thank George for coming to our community, because what was happening is we were fighting. Because we didn't like this system, what was happening, because we were so much into the environment. So there was a fight between our side and the other side. The reason of the fight there was, on our side here where we are, there is a man who was dumping, pushing the river to the other side. And those guys that side were pushing the river to this side. So now it became a fight, and the river was just too small, almost to a meter. But when George came, these two parties managed to go to the other side, and he also came to our side, and they discussed what was the problem, and we raised that the problem, those people are concerned that their houses are taken by the river, and even our side here, we are concerned that, you know, we need to protect the river. So as we talked and trying to balance the equation, it's where now they come up with a way that people must present that we find that if maybe the gabions are put within the river to protect the river, that will help and that will stop the fight. So that was the decision from on our side, the side, that everybody looked into it and they saw that, okay, it was necessary now. It was better that we stop whatever we're doing, because there is a plan that is presented, that at least if we prevent the river, that's going to also prevent our houses from being taken away, and also tourism into our community. And we went also to the other section, which is Rasta village, where also as Rastas, they had a problem with people also that were dumping. Some they were doing it for money, because when the truck comes there to deposit that, they get the monies. And also he managed to bring up all those teams together to see that at least what we must do, we must try to find a common base, that whatever we're doing, it must benefit all of us as a community. It must benefit not one person that is dumping, but we must come up with a plan that is going to help all of us. So that's when we also discovered that maybe if you bring up the tourism of the on that side where there will be fishery and other things, then yeah, I think it was settled along those ways where there was a way forward to our problem. But what was exciting is the way that how we approached, that went straight to the roots, where we had to go deep to find out what was the cause of the problem, because we're not going to just solve it if we never went deep to the roots. So we find the roots that the people had problems to protect their houses and all these other things. And also we highlighted in the B, so that at least there will be ways that our waste that we collect, you know, we're going to be recycling it and making up bricks, helping the community also. If they want to stabilize their houses, they can bring some other the things that need to be recycled, and can even give them the bricks that we have made. So also that it brings, you know, it gives a hope to the people that, okay, there is a plan B, there is a way forward. Thanks.
So thank you very much, my colleagues and friends. So just to summarize what was so amazing yesterday, just because of our having engaged in restorative conversations with the community and some of the councillors, is how there was such a sense of unity yesterday with some serious government departments, the councillors from various wards in Alex and the community, and how there was a total sense of cohesion as we mapped out the way forward in a collaborative way. And through civic education, it's amazing how we can start negotiating with government in a way that is non-confrontational and in a very restorative manner. So we're very excited about the partnership with government, local government, with business and with the community. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the outcomes of our Restorative Environmental Justice Initiative. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Leslie Ann. I think, you know, when we talk about how we take restorative justice forward and what are the spaces where restorative justice is going to become more and more relevant, I think the issue of environmental justice and the applicability of restorative justice in resolving conflicts relating to the environment, to climate, is going to be relevant in the future. It's very interesting to note that restorative justice in that space can play a role in the empowerment of communities, in sharing knowledge and empowering communities, giving them more knowledge about their rights as well, and using it to deal with conflict so that, you know, there's more equitable access to resources in communities. The role of peacemaking in the Jukske River region is extremely important, and I think more and more the conversations about restorative justice will move from the criminal justice space to the environmental justice space. So thank you very much, Leslie Ann. I think for those of you who have been posting questions on the Q&A, these will be addressed at the end when we do the Q&A discussion. So thank you so much for your patience in advance. I would now like to call Ms. Vanessa Pariachi and Ms. Lisa Harris, who will now introduce the South African Coalition for Restorative Justice. So they will explain that, as one of the outcomes of the first restorative justice webinar that was held in collaboration with the UKZN, what emanated was the South African Coalition for Restorative Justice. Vanessa has been working as a social worker in the criminal justice sector for over 27 years. She is a restorative justice practitioner for victim offender mediation, family group conferencing and healing circles, and has vast experience in conflict mediation. Lisa of Restore has worked with young offenders for over 17 years in Cape Town's Paulsmoor prison. And Lisa's work has been underpinned by an MA in restorative justice, and through Restore, she facilitates monthly victim awareness programs. So over to my two colleagues, and thank you.
Thank you, Hema. Sorry that you can't see me, but thank you to all the speakers. Today it's been very inspiring and quite profound, just talking about restorative justice. So I think Lisa and I are here to introduce you to the, what can I say, aspiration of having a South African coalition on restorative justice. And I think in the spirit of talking about how do we take restorative justice forward in South Africa, from the last webinar, there were a few passionate restorative justice activists who, we really had a conversation post-webinar, how we can take this movement of restorative justice forward in South Africa. So I think the concept of having a coalition was initiated. And I think in this year, there's been a series of meetings of a kind of ad hoc steering committee consisting of KwaZulu-Natal, Restorative Justice Centre, UKZN, Restore, and myself. Just having many conversations and exploring ideas of, how we can make this coalition, or where would there be points of collaboration, and how can we build such a movement? So if we ask ourselves, who are we? Who do we wish to be? I think from our mission statement, I think what we hope to see is to drive a collaborative, participatory, and intersectoral effort to reignite restorative justice in South Africa, encouraging collaboration between restorative justice practitioners, policymakers, academics, and relevant stakeholders to work together towards peace building, conflict resolution, and social justice, which will lead to a greater social cohesion and broader societal transformation in South Africa. I love the concept that we have been talking about, creating restorative justice cities and looking at non-violent transformation, just this restorative justice concept is so broad, as you have heard from our speakers. So I think the coalition and who we had thought about it being a civil society space, but obviously engaging in dialoguing with state partners. So I think restorative justice belongs to all of us. So, that's who we hope it to be. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Lisa, that's just going to share with us a little bit of the fruits of the webinar that we had since 2021 and just what we've been doing in 2022 as a steering committee.
Greetings, everyone. It's wonderful to be here and be with you all. Just to share some of the fruits from the webinar and what we've been busy with in 2022. So through the webinar in 2021, we were able to raise the profile of restorative justice. And then actually what was birthed through that was this coming together to form the South African Coalition for Restorative Justice. So the beginnings of this coalition came through webinar last year. And and we've been able to really grow as restorative justice agencies and collaborate together. In that time, we've been able to develop terms of reference and an action log over this year in 2022. We've established the steering committee, as mentioned, and we've just been exploring relationships, just finding synergy together, which really ties into the value of collaboration and building of relationship within restorative justice. So we've been having monthly meetings and managing to fit our diaries as we each manage our own work. We've come together just to share ideas, to collaborate. We've been able to share proposals, calls for funding and proposals. There's also been training collaboration as we've come together to collaborate. Some training in restorative justice has come out of that amongst us. We've started building a database of restorative justice practitioners, and this is ongoing. And then we've started also developing a database of donors who would support the restorative justice work in South Africa. And obviously, we've also been collaborating on this webinar with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So it's been a wonderful year, and also, as mentioned, we've started speaking about the restorative justice cities moving forward into 2023. So we're excited about that. And then just briefly, what we hope to achieve in 2023 is to continue to build the database for practitioners and to grow the coalition. We are hoping to host Dr. David Gustafsson in South Africa. We're hoping that will happen early in 2023. We will continue to look at restorative justice in schools and in prison, as well as community grassroots approaches. We hope to continue to raise the profile of restorative justice in South Africa, exploring, as mentioned, the restorative justice cities concept involving key stakeholders, and continuing to build the coalition and network, and building capacity through training. So that's our hopes and vision for 2023, and we hope we can continue to partner with all of you that have joined us on this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Vanessa.
So just in conclusion, I think what we'd really like to see that's close to our heart, and as you've heard, is a broader application of restorative justice practices in the prevention of harm and conflict in South Africa. We would like to see communities become change agents as we collaborate. We hope to create a common language for all people in different spaces. Our theoretical model is an ecological approach, really embracing the different levels that comprise, working with restorative justice at various systems and levels, not just focusing on the individual, but families, communities, and broader society. But we just wanted to leave you at this point. We really believe collaboration is key. And as you can see on your screen, I love the one that says collaboration is like carbonation of fresh ideas. Working together just bubbles up ideas you would not have come up with solo, and it takes you so much further and faster. And I think that's what this year has been. It's just been so inspiring to work again with those like-minded. And just one thought and idea, that so much more can grow from working together in a team. And I think you can read the rest of it, but I think I just want to, it says find a group of people who challenge and inspire you. Spend a lot of time with them and it will change your life. And I think this is what we hope. I think collaboration has shown to be proven effective. We can never do anything on our own. And I think together, with each of our strengths and giftedness and passions, I think really we can make our world a more non-violent, relational, building deeper connections and really bringing healing. So thank you for your year, and we wish and hope to see you with us alongside really deepening this concept of restorative justice in our society.
Yeah, so just on that note, Vanessa, sorry, if you are interested to learn more about the South African Coalition for Restorative Justice, please put your name and email in the chat below, and we can follow up. So we'd love to just fill you in and follow up with you. So put your name and email address in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vanessa and Lisa. I think the South African Coalition is indeed, we've got quite a few aspirations. And as we broaden our relationships and our conversations with people working in the field, I think we can, really dream towards restorative cities in South Africa. Indeed, I think, we are well placed at the university, based in the School of Built Environment and Development Studies, to explore that possibility and start collaborative discussions with municipalities around the country. I'm now going to just put out there's just been a few questions. I'll put it out to the presenters, anyone who is willing to take these questions. The first one was on the relevance of restorative approaches in the cases of forced and coerced sterilization of HIV-positive women. What is the potential for restorative justice, and how can victims' rights be restored? And this is in the case where practitioners have actually violated the rights of victims. So that is the first question. And the second one was the relevance of restorative justice, how it can be used for homeless people, and how it can be used to reconcile and reunify the homeless with families. So I can open it up, and who of you would be, maybe Mike or Dave, could take those questions and give us some of your insights. Thank you.
I'm deferring here because that matter is one that's not particularly my wheelhouse. Certainly in Canada, historically, Indigenous women were sterilized without their knowledge, without their consent. But that goes back many, many years. And I think I probably need to defer to the people in South Africa about this one.
Thanks. Mike?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that context of the forced sterilization of HIV-positive women. But I think the general principles of restorative justice, of creating a space for telling the truth, for acknowledging the harm, and for taking steps to redress that would certainly apply. So, broad general answer would be definitely it's got relevance. And then the question for how could it apply to homeless people? Similarly, I think those principles do apply. I know a little bit more about that context, and I know that it is very complex, with many different factors playing a role, of which the breakdown of family life and damaged relationships would be only one, albeit critical ones. So I would suspect that the way in which that could be done, and is possibly even being done already in certain ways, would be to integrate restorative values and approaches into the organizations that are working with homeless people, so that it could infuse their programs and their general approach. Now, I know one or two organizations that work with in that context, and I think they generally do that in the sense of pushing back to residents and residents associations who are trying to be more forceful and force certain things onto people on the streets, and they emphasize then the right of allowing people a choice. So in that sense, really respecting their dignity, another restorative value. But I guess there would be room to perhaps make that more explicit, and to look at the value of dialogue in restoring and healing the damaged family relationships. So those would be my initial thoughts. But thank you for the questions, very penetrating questions, actually.
Yes, Lisa.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the point of working with those on the street, we just from our project perspective, we have several what we'd call rough sleepers that are involved as well in our research project, and many of them have obviously brushed with the law, so that's how we've also connected with them through our NGO. And so something we starting to explore, so it's by no means set in practice per se, but is actually healing circles amongst them. So not even taking it as far yet as looking at the complexities of the breakdown of relationships, of family, of communities, but recognizing that they themselves have, where they currently are, going through a lot of trauma. They're seeing many people around them die on the street through heroin overdose, through various, this, as Micah said, so many complexities. And so something we've begun to explore as a very basic foundational level is actually just a circle process, or what we could call healing circles, or just healing spaces, even just with them themselves, not even yet tapping into the restoring the other levels and layers, but yeah, there's definitely scope for that. So yeah, I just wanted to add that to the mix.
Yes, there's also another interesting question, and many of these questions actually relate to how much can we actually widen the tent, and and how we can use, and so that restorative justice can be the mainstream approach of addressing harm in various different contexts. So that leads me on to the next question is, RJ, in cases of armed conflict, victims of armed conflict, I think, as Mike suggested and Dave, I think many of the values and principles would really apply there. These are, often in cases of transitional contexts, these are the forgotten victims when societies have transitioned into what we have today, for example, in South Africa, a democratic state. Many victims of armed conflict are the forgotten victims. Mike, maybe you can just add to that a bit.
Yeah, I think the main thought that comes to mind is, I suppose what we have been saying really is about the importance of affirming the dignity of people, our constitutional value of human dignity. Obviously not only a constitutional value, it comes up in many philosophies and faiths as well. But I think that's what we're touching, is that no matter who a person is and what they have done, no matter how far they've fallen, the restorative approach would be to remind us that they are human beings created of infinite worth, and to start with recognizing that and giving them a space to begin to reclaim that. So whether it's people on the street, and creating space for their voices to be heard, that's a beautiful way of doing that. Mm-hmm. And so with people coming out of armed conflict and child soldiers, again, that's very complex. But I think it would start by recognizing the context and the humanity of those people involved, and what are the steps that need to be taken to help them to change and to grow, and creating spaces in which they can accept responsibility for the harm that they've caused. But yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, that's complex. I've certainly never worked directly in that space. So perhaps there are other voices on the panel as well that would like to contribute to that.
Dave?
Well, I'm wanting to be careful once again to defer to other voices on the panel. You know, here in Canada, I have to recognize that I'm a settler. I'm one of the colonizers. I'm male, clergy. You know, there's so many things wrong with my position that I could come into critique. So I have to be careful that I leave space for lots of other people. The only thing I would say is I was nodding emphatically through all of what Mike just said in terms of values and principles and the value of human worth, restoring dignity to people. Some of my close colleagues from my alma mater at KU Leuven in Belgium, near Brussels, are working just very, very fulsomely in transitional societies. Stefan Parmentier is one of those people. And they're doing absolute phenomenal work in these transitional societies. Some of my own students from Queen's University, where I taught courses on restorative justice, returned to Rwanda, and they have been doing phenomenal work in the Gacaca courts and with communities in Rwanda. So there's no question it can be done. It can be done phenomenally well with tremendous healing. Restorative justice is powerful, powerful stuff. The values and principles of it are so human and so basic to our well-being. But in the hands of really competent practitioners, tremendous things can be done. And I've already said more than I planned to. So over to the others.
Yeah, I think even in South Africa, I mean, a lot has to be learned and realized through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we cannot talk about restorative justice without talking about Ubuntu and the TRC and what TRC gave to the world, and what did we do right and what did we do wrong with the TRC, and then accept responsibility for where we went wrong and learn from that. So I think I've addressed all the questions. I'm just going to check if there's any more. I think that's it then. So thank you, everybody. I'm just going to call upon, I don't know whether Professor Kalema is back with us. If he is, I'll call upon him to do the summation and vote of thanks, but I will continue with the summation, and let's hope he will be here to do the vote of thanks. I don't see him on the screen. Prof. Kalema, are you here? No. Okay, I'm just going to do a very, very short summation. This was indeed a very, very interesting webinar for myself as well. Dave, I want to thank you for your presentation, your stories, and the importance of narratives and storytelling in order to go deep into the issue is extremely important. And the stories of the human family, there's no borders there. The importance of the relevance of restorative justice, for example, in land claims, the importance of leadership in claiming land rights. These are all the things that you actually highlighted in your talk. And what does RJ offer, especially in the case of very serious and violent crimes, and the importance of the voices of the victim in cases of sexual violence, such as rape. And the description of the paraclete I found extremely interesting, and I think I'm going to be using that in the future in teaching, as well as in any workshop that I might be called to actually host. To be called alongside, to support, to assist, and to advocate. I think this is what victims want. And the question about what do victims want from restorative justice is something that needs a lot of inquiry as well. And then the issue of retribution. What is crime? Crime is law breaking and involves establishing guilt. And what can restorative justice then offer? And we find that, especially in South Africa as well, the personal histories of offenders is often overlooked during the trial, okay, because it's a legal matter. There's actually not much time apart from mitigation in sentence to hear about the personal histories of of offenders. And these only come to light, for example, when they become eligible to be considered for parole, when you go into their own backgrounds and what actually made the criminal. And the restorative justice actually creates the opportunity for the offender and the victim to relate the story of their lives. So as you mentioned, the pendulum actually swings between retribution and punishment, and the importance of actually using the wide lens, which gives us much more information and data. And the importance of actually moving towards a needs-based justice, okay, and using the right tool for the task. So thank you, Dave. That was really, really informative, and I think we can really use some of those insights in the South African context. Mike, I think I've actually met Reverend Clayton myself, and he's doing some great work with offenders in correctional centers, and looking specifically at the relevance of restorative justice in custodial settings. There have been quite a few developments recently where the conversations about restorative justice are coming to the fore in the media, amongst academics, and more there's a realization that this discussion and this debate and the contestations of restorative justice, especially since we have such very, very high rates of crime, the calls for more severe punishment and the return of the death penalty is getting ever so louder. And we need to actually bring that back and talk about how restorative justice can be used for the prevention of crime, and the relevance and the importance of restorative approaches when, in the upbringing of children and within the family. Thank you very much to Leslie Ann for the panel discussion and the moving the discussion away from the criminal justice system and within communities, and how then restorative approaches can be used to resolve conflicts relating to the environment. I think that discussion is something that's going to go out into the fore now, and there's great opportunities if there are any students that are participants in this webinar. That is a great opportunity for research in the future, whether you are in community development studies, housing, or even looking at the built environment. I was very, very touched by the participation of the forum, the Water Sanitation Community Forum, as well as Dasta, who was trying to be a participant and be involved in the resolving conflict with all the different sides. So it's important that, as you mentioned, that the younger generation becomes more aware and conscientized about pollution, the impact on health and housing and community settlement. Thank you, Lisa and Vanessa, for introducing the South African Coalition for Restorative Justice. And I'm really, really excited and hopeful that we will actually see the vision of a restorative city in South Africa. We don't know exactly where that's going to be. I'm hoping that Professor Kalema is back. Can I ask Melissa whether he is back? And I will hand over for him to just do the final vote of thanks.
Hi, Dr. Hargovan. He hasn't come in as yet. He's still busy in another session, so we can actually close up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd like to place on record the involvement and the absolute efficiency of Melissa. She has brought us all together, made sure everything worked well, and thank you very much. To the University Faculty of Humanities, the School of Built Environment and Development Studies, for your willingness and excitement about hosting this and being so open to the idea of having an annual event by the university, for coordinating all the logistics and taking over and being a part of this. I really want to thank you and acknowledge your involvement. Me being a part of the university myself, but it's opened a new world for me as well. Also, all the panelists and all the participants, thank you for your involvement today. For those who have posted questions, thank you for those questions. They were quite thought-provoking. And for those who have posted on the chat. I think that you will see us all, maybe others, next year, this time, the 3rd week of November, when we will have our 3rd Restorative Justice webinar to commemorate International Restorative Justice Week. Thank you very much, and go well and keep safe. Thank you.